Thank you for tuning in to All Things Real Estate. Once again, here are your hosts, Brad Avergon and Gary Kelley.
Welcome back to All Things Real Estate. For the record, I'm with Brad Avergon. He's with Fairway Independent Mortgage. He's sitting there, all colors and all that. I'm Gary Kelley. I'm with Cassidy Realty Group, and I'm sitting here in a black shirt, but it's got colors in the logo. We're talking about the summer school for real estate agents, the NAR lawsuit, and some of the implications of it. And Brad is always very good at starting to point out some of the fallacies in all this. I mean, one of the fallacies I see, Brad?
Yeah.
Right now, going forward, if I want to show a house, I've got to get someone to sign paperwork saying that I'm showing them the house. If they come to an open house, however, they don't need to do that paperwork.
That's right.
And I'm a realtor. Realtor means that I have additional training, which for me worked out to be 6 hours and a lunch, and I took an oath. Okay. And it cost me all in around $800 a year to be a realtor. Okay. If I work for a firm that was not associated with a realtor, for example, City Realty Group in Boston or Red Tree in Boston, they are not a realtor firm, so they don't have to pay those fees and they don't have to follow those rules, which I think is just this glaring loophole in the whole thing. Do I think that over time they will evolve to that? Yes, of course I do, because I think everyone around them will be. But at this point, the whole question for me is, what's the value of being a realtor? And it's supposed to be higher ethics and all that. And I get that. There's designations that you get through being a realtor. I have designations. I'm a certified luxury home marketing specialist, and I'm a certified negotiation expert. But I get those certifications through a different organizations, not through the National Association of Realtor. Just my preference. It's nothing more than that. It's not insidious. But if you're in a firm that's part of the Realtor Association, everyone's got to be in it and everyone's got to take the same oath, which I think is like, frankly, I'm going to get in trouble for this. It's kind of like a union. You're in the union and everyone has to be in it. And if you aren't part of it, then you're not one of those organizations. So anyway, Brad, you were going on and on about some of the shortcomings of this.
Yeah. So, I understand the lawsuit. The lawsuit, again, just to recap, implied that sellers were forced into a situation where they had to pay the buyer's agent's fee, and they felt like they had no choice. And look, I understand we live in a litigious world, and unfortunately, and so people can buy, the McDonald's gets sued because somebody spills coffee on themselves, right? Because they didn't understand the coffee was going to be hot. So I'm of the mindset that the way this has worked for decades, again, I've been doing this for 37 years, is that the seller was in a position where they could list the property had a commission on it. The buyer agent agreed to share that. The seller agent, listing agent agreed to share that commission and in turn draw in more buyers. The buyer, especially if they had a low down payment, was in a position where they might be able to buy that property. Now that has shifted. And the idea is now that this lawsuit came around, all right, transparency everywhere. Now that has shifted to where the seller technically just has to pay their listing agreement with whatever the listing agent is. They can choose to accept an offer that dictates that the buyer is paying it. They can offer it in advance through their listing agent on a website that's not the MLS website if they choose to market their property to more buyers. But what I think has happened is, in the guise of transparency, they have complicated what was a much more transparent transaction and a very clear understanding to all parties as to how this worked. And now they have complicated it, requiring much more back and forth. And it calls into question, because I understand the goal is to provide more housing for first-time home buyers. That's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's charter. We want to get more people into homes. Well, if you're a buyer and you're trying to buy a home and you don't have the money to pay the buyer agent specifically, you've only got your down payment that you may have saved up, you may have had part of it gifted to you, it may preclude you from getting into that home if you have a seller that does not want to pay for that commission. And so I think it detracts from what the goal was, in my opinion. That being said, we find ourselves here, so we are adjusting. You had brought up in the first half of the show, what happens to that commission that's owed? Well, part of it is that we can, up to what's called loan to value. So basically meaning if somebody says they're putting 5% down, and let's say they own a 2% co-broke fee, we may be able to finance it in, but we're going to consider that loan not 5% down anymore. We're going to consider it 3% down, 97% loan to value. So there's thresholds. What changes that? Well, the PMI changes for the buyer. The interest rate may change.
The private mortgage insurance.
Exactly. I'm sorry. Private mortgage insurance may increase. The interest rate may increase because the loan to value is higher. If somebody only had 3% to put down, and they're trying to go for a Fannie Mae loan, they may not be able to finance that extra percent. What happens there? Do they not get a home? So there's a lot of things that it's going to create this back and forth, and quite frankly, a lot of it's in the gray. You guys are back in school, we're in school, we're learning as we go to adjust to this kind of new world.
I think that the intent that they were trying to achieve somewhere got lost in this. That's my view. I've got commentary written right across my chest now. I also believe that a lot of agents are going to, some large number of, newer or less active agents will just say, screw this and leave the industry, because it's going to be more difficult, more challenging to get paid. And the argument is, well, if you can't negotiate your own pay, you have no business negotiating a purchase of a house. I respect that hard-nosed opinion. At the same time, I think it's going to be a challenge for some people, because as much as you'd like to think that realtors are rolling in dough, not every realtor is rolling in dough by any stretch. And so it just makes it more challenging.
I would agree. I think there's going to be a lot of agents that are going to leave. And for those that stay, they may just try to work more with sellers. My bigger concern in this is the representation for the buyer. I strongly believe and advocate for for buyers to get a buyer agent, because it's the largest purchase they're going to make in their lifetime. They have no experience in this world, and in what we do, the world of real estate, what you can and say can be used against you. And so you've got a situation where, you brought an example where somebody walks into an open house, a buyer walks into an open house and says to the listing agent, I want to make an offer. There is no requirement that says you have to have a buyer agent. The listing agent will be paid by that person. So the buyer is working with a professional that is trained, that knows their laws, and is their fiduciary, their financial responsibility is 100% to that seller to try to get that property sold. So the buyer's really, in dangerous waters, and they don't realize it. And I'm concerned about some of the things that may happen. Talk about lawsuits. I think, for some of those people that wander in there may be lawsuits down the road. I don't know, but I don't think it's in their best interest. And I think that's going to be a side effect of what happened here. Again, this is my commentary. Sure, where.
No, I think you're right. And, time will tell. I think that the National Association of Realtors, a lot of well-intended people have worked really hard to stitch something together to, I'm going to call it lawsuit repellent. I'm trying to be a little funny, try to lighten it a little bit. So they've stitched together something that's lawsuit repellent. Okay, that's fine. But I don't think that it's going to adequately address all the different things that may come up. And so I think, over the wintertime, this is going to get updated would be my guess. I don't think it's going to happen right away, but when people look back and say, "Ooh, how are we doing with this thing?" I think there's a lot of work still to be done. And I don't want to take away from the people who worked really hard trying to, put together solutions and new forms, because they've worked really hard. And we can sit here and criticize, but we weren't a part of it. I would also say we weren't a part of the jury that came up with this as being a bad thing. And I tend to, in the United States, I tend to respect the jury process. So there's a number of things that I find a little troublesome, and we'll get there. We'll figure it out.
I would agree. One thing that I would like to make sure our listeners hear is, if you are considering purchasing real estate, there's a lot of changes, as Gary and I are discussing, that are going on. Please, before you sign any document, make sure you have a clear understanding. We in Massachusetts are in what's called an attorney state, which means attorneys conduct closings. Please consider either getting a buyer agent to represent you, and or consulting with an attorney before you do anything, so you don't get yourself into a situation where you're in trouble.
One thing I'm going to say, Brad, along those lines is, you want to see a house, people are going to ask for paperwork now. And, the paperwork doesn't have to be a lifetime. It can be for the showing of one house. Your agent may not like that, but I'll show someone a house if they want to see it. I don't want to get into the situation of, I don't want to, do fixed prices to show houses. There are some people that will end up doing that. I'll show you this house, but it's going to cost you $50. I'm not going to do that. Okay. But I do think that, there's an evolution, a next step that's going to come from all this. And to me, that's exciting.
I would agree. We're always learning, Gary.
So Brad, we're basically out of time. How does someone reach you?
Best way to reach me, Gary, is via my cell phone, which is 978-375-5531, or they can email me at brad@bradavergon.com. And Gary, how do they reach you?
Brad, they can reach me by, smoke signals. An email, Gary@movewithgary.com. Phone 508-733-6005. As they like to say, call, click, or stop in, but I'm very rarely in the office. So until we meet again, Brad, thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Everybody be well out there.
Once again, thank you for watching All Things Real Estate. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Brad or Gary.